Welcome to the Meta, episode 26, end of season. I'm not sure how many there's been now, 6 or 7. What is the show? So first of all, welcome to the show. If this is the first time you've seen it or listened to it. A lot of people listen on YouTube, I understand. Anyway, well, let me start speaking about YouTube. Let's start to have some background content here. This is by a YouTuber, content creator, Axel, German guy, plays in Division 1, has some great fights, great content. We can watch that while I talk. Anyway, what exactly is the show? So this is something where we look at the competitive GAC meta and what's going on. We check it out twice a season. I give my own personal thoughts, what I see, what I think, etc. Why should you care about me? Well, as a player, as a GAC player, I've got like 10 million GP. I play in the top 50 or 100, whatever, of Kyber 1. But really what matters for this particular show is that I watch a huge amount of GAC combat, and mostly for Grand Arena Science, where there's almost 3,000 of those fights featured for people to go look them up and learn something for themselves or help themselves out. Anyway, so I watch a lot. That's why I know a little bit. So, what is going on with the meta right now? The meta was frankly amazing for the last couple of seasons, especially this last season. That's awesome. I don't really want to say necessarily that the meta is amazing right now because, as you know, as you probably know, we're going into a 3v3 season, this next one. So it's going to be very interesting as the further GAC seasons play out, because after we play a season of 3v3, when we start at 5v5 again, people don't remember usually the fights, the matches that they used to do, and it takes them a while to sort of get up to speed. And I think everybody going into 3v3, it's been 5 months, 4 or 5 months since there's been a 3v3. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns, a bunch of new characters. How are they going to play? It's going to be interesting. If you like 3v3, wonderful. It's going to be awesome. I like 3v3. If you don't like 3v3, it's going to be maybe less than wonderful, because you're sort of incentivized now to play with the crystals. Anyway, one thing I want to talk about that did play a small role or that will play a small role in 5v5, in the meta in 5v5. The 3v3 and 5v5 metas are a little bit different, but they still do have an impact on each other. And part of that, let's use Darth Malgus as an example. So, because we know he's in the game already, so we know his kit and we know how he works and all of that. We haven't obviously played with him, and we won't for another 3 months till the third conquest. But people are already making decisions about what they're going to do with Darth Malgus, and by default, in GAC at least, he's really the next GAC character. By default, that also plays a role in what people are doing with their Sith Empire characters or other Sith characters a little bit at the same time, because using him as an example, some people are going to get him and are planning on putting 3 Zeta Omicrons or 2 or 1 or whatever. I'll be putting 3 myself, I think. At least 1. I think 1 is going to be, one will be required for GAC. I think the second one will be semi-required, and some people might put on all 3. Anyway, talking about how Darth Malgus affects the GAC meta as a whole. It's now much easier to justify improving your Sith Empire team, because HK is likely not going to be part of most Darth Malgus teams unless there's this new Jedi meta, which is very possible, actually. I think Old Republic and Jedi are the next meta. They got Inquisitors, now it's going to be Old Republic and Jedi. Anyway, putting that aside, it's a good reason to build up gear, etc., your Sith Empire. And also because in 3v3, the Sith Empire trio, Darth Revan, Darth Malak and Basilisk are a fantastic team on defense. Some people remember troopers take them out. Vader still takes them out even after his nerfs. The road ahead changes. And there's some other options as well that aren't GLs to take out Darth Revan. However, you can still split them up. You can add in Darth Malak as a solo option on offense. All that to say, those things are a lot easier to justify now if you're planning on getting Darth Malak because they benefit you in 3v3. And in general, people who care about 3v3 will have a added advantage over every other GAC players because many people don't like 3v3s and are not going to be trying very hard. So if you try a little bit harder, you'll probably get a bigger amount of wins than you might otherwise have, just because a number of people don't care for the game mode so much. Or hate. Some people actually hate the game mode. But this is interesting how the future plays a big role on the present, and how I think it'll have an impact on 3v3s, and also in next week's. Some people would wish that next month's 5v5 season. That'll be very interesting because, as we'll see later on, Darth Revan is not a popular 5v5 team now. Wampa has changed the game. So let's look towards the past. And as we were just talking about Omicrons, this is an interesting aspect of Omicrons that have shifted as the current format of the meta has developed, and how people have been learning and figuring out and discovering new off-tier counters. I don't like off-meta counters because most off-tier counters are actually the meta right now. So off-meta to me doesn't make any sense. I think off-tier is more appropriate. Like use one power level lower, one power tier lower of characters to kill a next tier above. Anyway, that's just my preference. Most players, well, let's take a look. Actually, I have it here. Most players have most GAC-focused players have 5 Omicrons now. Not everybody, and it's very different in Kyber 1 versus Erodium 1. Hugely different just because of the available characters you have and the roster that you have. I mean, that's honestly the biggest difference. So, for example, I think in 5v5, in Kyber 1, of course 5v5 is all we've had so far, you have Qui-Gon Jinn, Wampa, Zam, Iden, and Starkiller. Those in Kyber 1 are the most popular Omicron, the most powerful, flexible, etc. You can see here, I think if you don't look at the Omicron data on a regular basis, you'll be surprised. There are more Chief Chirpa Omicrons than there are Zam Wessel Omicrons. And in what world is Chief Chirpa, the Ewoks, better than the Bounty Hunters with Zam? If a certain YouTuber is watching this video, I agree that you may be correct and that your Ewoks are better than Zam and the Bounty Hunters. But anyway, they still can't go faster than Zam and would lose in a mirror match, I think, against most good Zam teams. Put that aside. Different tier levels have different Omicrons. So I'm talking about Kyber 1 here. So please, if you're at a lower, trust me, I'm sure it says. I'm not sure if you should, but if you're at a lower league, then it's a whole different story. But in Kyber 1, those are the 5 Omicrons that most people have. When the Omicrons came out, most of them, with the exception of Iden, I guess, and maybe Starkiller, have shifted. I mean, Iden and Starkiller are still sort of used on defense. But when Qui-Gon Jinn came out, he was on defense immediately. I mean, some people used him on offense, but people thought to put him on defense right away. Iden, she was on defense right away. Wampa, you can't use him on defense, so ignore him. Starkiller, he was on defense. Zam is sort of a mixed bag. I still think she's, depending on your roster and who you fight and what sort of teams you're going up against, I think she's actually better on defense in the current meta right now, but not against all players. Because if you need her to beat a very like a very fast dash team or something like that, or it's very easy to beat Darth Revan with Zam and the Bounty Hunters. There's some back and forth there, but I think Zam is better on defense in terms of hold rate and banner reduction. But anyway, besides Wampa, almost all of them, Wampa always is on offense, but almost all of them are now switching to offensive use, as people find those counters available from when they were first introduced. I mean, not everybody, Bad Batch was found as a counter to Qui-Gon Jinn within the first GAC. Like, I remember there being a few videos on how good Bad Batch was at much lower gear levels. But still, a lot of people take time to learn this and to realize that they can't put it on defense against people who know the Bad Batch team or who have Bad Batch because they learn about the team. Iden took a little bit longer for people to become aware of good defensive counters, for them to be popular. Starkiller, he didn't take quite as long, but even now, the good counters for Starkiller, the non-GL good counters, are they take some more finesse, and it's not one counter. Well, it's sort of GG and Bounty Hunters and Troopers you can use against all the teams, but it very much depends on speed and which tank Starkiller has. Or now you see Starkiller with like Ray Jedi training instead of Visas. And other characters. There's different ways to put the team on defense. It's not always just Visas now, to counter some of the GG teams in particular. That's sort of their goals. Anyway, fascinating, that whole thing. The main point I'm trying to make is there's a lot of shift to offense as there's a realization that the teams with the Omicron characters, aren't most powerful on defense, which is a normal thing for most teams as the off-tier counters are discovered. But it's interesting because it just continues that trend. It's not like any new teams have been introduced since some of these Omicrons that have, let me think carefully before I say this. No, there's really no new Omicron teams. Sort of Iden and Wampa are the latest, who made the other Omicrons bad. Wampa and Iden sort of counter each other. Well, Wampa counters Iden, but none of the other Omicrons have really countered the ones I was talking about. So it says people realize the value of them on offense and their weaknesses on defense. They use them more on offense. And I think this is in general the case for most Omicrons, because they usually influence an aspect of the character that the AI doesn't play very well. When you can use it offensively as a player and make better choices, you will get a much higher success rate, much higher banner differential. And I think it's encouraging people to play more offense rather than rely on a strong defense to win, which is the trend that continues in GAC. More and more people are expecting the full clear, especially with the fleet changes. Not everyone. Most people expect or plan to one-shot the character zones, and fleet often ends up contributing more than the character zones to who wins or loses the match. It's going to be very interesting in 3v3 as well. Oh yeah, so this is I forgot to mention this aspect of it. Well, I'm sort of talking about now in 3v3. One of the reasons why I think it takes longer for Omicrons, why it takes a while for Omicrons to shift to offense, is because you have to actually think about how you're going to use them. And usually that takes a guild or a content creator or something to make a video that you can follow, so you don't have to figure it out yourself. It's much easier to reproduce something that somebody else has proven than to take the time and the risk of doing it yourself. And it's going to be very interesting in 3v3s because nobody knows what these Omicrons do in 3v3s. So there's going to be a lot of risk taking. Or you'll put everything on defense, and then any player who focuses on offense is going to have a huge advantage if they figure some stuff out or they go do the research. Or, if you're listening to me, you're doing some sort of research or you care about GAC a bit, you have time to spend. Yeah, time, that's another big thing here. More and more people are, I wouldn't say more and more. it's becoming less rare that people take a break, especially with 3v3 coming up. Requires more time than 5v5, frankly. Not a huge amount more time, but the battles are still 5 minutes. And there's 15 versus 11 character battles, in Kyber 1. In Kyber. But it's something that does, this amount of time that's taken has an impact on the meta as well. Because assuming the amount of battles doesn't change, there's always going to be more units. Like, they don't stop introducing more units, or Omicrons to old units. It changes their playstyle and what they do. Let's go back to the video. And learning all of these takes time. And there's more complexity on how the characters interact with each other, how they interact with the defense. And in some ways, there's actually more incentive in the last few months after they changed the GAC structure. There was more incentive to do well, so people care about it more. But the amount of time they have doesn't change. I mean, you have kids, you have family, you have a job, you have friends. This is supposed to be a fun game where you don't have to spend, hours a day playing it. That's way too much for most people. So it's interesting to see how the continually growing complexity of this game is changing the GAC meta. Like, there are very few people. If you look at the top of the GAC, like, Hawkeyes is no longer playing so seriously. And partially, I was talking last week or last episode about how the guild focus, I guess, or availability of knowledge and stuff plays a big role in what players at the top of the GAC leaderboard, like, as they discover new counters and team combinations and stuff like that, and then share it with their guild or their alliance or something. Then you have a lot of players from those guilds or those alliances that are getting a great advantage because they can save time and know something that other players don't. So I think that's going to continue to impact the meta, especially as whole new factions come out. There's a lot of people who still don't know how Bad Batch works, and that's a way more than 6-month-old character. 9 months, almost a year, I think. About a year. And now the Inquisitorius, whatever, are coming. There's going to be more. I think some Old Republic faction, or growth of the Old Republic faction, or something like that. And we're going to have more of that. And it's going to make the competitive GAC players, it gives them an advantage, I guess, because they continue spending time learning about the game. But the game itself, that was a fun little end of the video. Fun fight. The game itself is just getting more complex. So people with only a certain amount of time are going to have a hard time keeping up a certain level of crystal income or performance. Although, if you're listening to this in the first place, you're probably in one of those players that have free time, or you have a long commute to work, maybe, or something like that. Oh yeah, sorry, by the way. Not really sorry, but talking about time, I haven't taken the time to fix my amazing background. You can enjoy my white wall here in the office. Yeah, burnout. Burnout is definitely a real thing. I think especially as the complexity of this game grows, as people are finding more and more things to do with less and less time, it becomes less fun, really. And I think the way that the meta has changed, or the GAC format has changed, has played a big role in that as well. I would say especially for the competitive players. So let's say, I think for the average player, the GAC format change was fantastic. Like, you're now winning 50% of your fights instead of getting curb stomped 80% of your fights, But for the competitive players who really care greatly about winning, that's a big part of their why they play, is to win all the time. Which is sort of normal for single player games, you expect to win. That's you're the protagonist and your goal is to beat everybody else and feel powerful. But now that SWGOH and GAC, which the competitive modes of this game are the focal point. I mean, you can collect for sure, but Nothing wrong with collecting. It's a fun collecting game. It's a fun combat game, actually. I started playing it because of the combat. But it's still, like, the rewards are centered around competition. And for many players, if they were used to winning most of the time, and that's the way they succeeded at GAC, you could build a great roster. And that was, it was a spreadsheet game, the vast majority of it. Then you would win with very little effort the majority of your GAC fights. But now, for those sorts of players who played the spreadsheet game and weren't used to playing people that also were they weren't used to playing people who had an advantage over them, like a roster character advantage especially, which doesn't make somebody a better player. The Kyber 1 range is enormous, and everybody in Kyber 1 gets the same rewards. So there's really not much of an advantage to being top 100 in Kyber 1 versus top 1,000 in Kyber 1. Like, reward-wise, exactly the same. If you win more, great. If you win less, because the winning crystals is 250 and 950, so it's 650 crystals different. That's a big deal. But not hard to maintain a 50-50 record in Kyber 1 for many players. Anyway, talking about that, I think for players who are used to winning because of their roster and the matchmaking at the time, you could manipulate it to give yourself a huge advantage. It's tough for them in this current competitive meta where you actually lose half the time, or maybe I think many competitive players are not losing 50% of the time. They're losing like 40% of the time ish, 55 to 65% of the fights they win. And that's great. Like, you'll keep climbing all the way to Kyber 1, depending on your roster and your creativity and the time you have available, obviously. But I think we're seeing recently some players, especially now that 3v3 is back, taking a break or slowing down a bit, because it can be demoralizing if you're losing, if you expect just to win all the time, which is not what competition is about. Competition is about getting better and improving yourself more than beating other players. I mean, beating other players is a part of competition also. But anyway, in my perspective, I think competition is more about improving yourself than about making other people feel bad. You have to beat other players, but hopefully they're in it to improve themselves and not just to beat you. Although both parts are very important. Anyway, that's my personal opinion. So I think this is having some impact on the people who are taking a break or burnout or not caring as much. That's why I think people who still care and who enjoy 3v3 are going to have a great advantage. Like, let's say you're now Kyber 1, top 500. There's a great chance you go to the top 200, just because there's going to be a lot of players who don't care so much about 3v3, in my opinion. Oh yeah. One thing that's very interesting for people who are thinking like, oh, well, you have to have a huge roster or a ton of time to place in Kyber 1. You could be in Kyber 1 with like 2 or 3 with probably 1 GL. You could be in Kyber 1. There's a video, I think, by Infinim, really nice guy and very good player, who got into Kyber 1. I think he has 5 million GP or something like that. 5.5, something. Check the video out, it's very interesting. Obviously, everybody's situation is different, and the available time you have is different, and the focus, all of that. I mean, it's not like everybody can do what everybody else can. We're all individual humans. But you can do a lot if you want to get into Kyber 1. It's in the range of, I don't know, half the player base, probably, of GAC-focused players. Probably a third, if I count the amount of players. Roster-wise, about a quarter to a third of the 400,000 to 500,000 players. Roster-wise, about a quarter, actually, now that I'm thinking about the actual numbers. Yeah, about a quarter of the players have 1 GL. I mean, you have to have modding and time and effort and everything. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, you have 1 GL, you can get into Kyber 1. But it's possible, which is pretty cool. That's one thing I love about the meta right now. Like, you can do a lot with a little if you're creative and have time and got your modding spot on and you know how to do counters and stuff like that. I did have a point to all of this. I did in fact have a point. 25 minutes, holy moly. You should play more offensive GAC. That is my recommendation. Personally, I love playing offense. I don't care as much about the off-tier counters and perfecting every little thing. I do very little scouting. I mean, I check the characters that the opponent has and I check what fleets they have. I check a few characters for mods in particular. You know, like is it a really well modded mod Mothma? And now actually I don't care with Iden. What is their Wampa like? Just a few characters here and there. What are their speeds? You know, how fast is Dash and Darth Revan and Piet and stuff. But that takes just a few minutes. Because I care more about knowing that I have teams that can beat pretty much any defensive team. So I actually spend more time with my defense than my offense, and just more time putting together defense that I know is going to strip banners from most players. Obviously, if you play another player who's offensive focused like you are, like I am, if you make one little mistake, you lose. Or they could outthink you and have a better strategy than you, which certainly happens to me as well. And that's where I can learn something. Like, that's awesome fighting players like that. It improves my game quite a bit. But anyway, I think offense, you spend less time. It is, I think, more fun. Like, I like fighting. I like the combat in this game a lot. I think it's very cool. And the interaction between all the characters, that's something that I really enjoy. Knowing how all the puzzle pieces fit together is something that I get a kick out of. And the approach of doing it too, I think, from offense versus defense is defense, you like build a really clever, crafty defense that your opponent will have a hard time breaking through, and then you take the rest of your characters and you see what you can do on offense. It's a broad simplification. I know that's not exactly what happens. Where I like to approach it the other way, where I think, okay, what if somebody sets all 6 GLs, Starkiller, General Skywalker, Darth Revan, I don't know, Dash, Iden, whatever, some other powerful team. What do I need to have to make sure that I can beat all of those in one shot for high banners? That's how I approach my GAC. Like, that general principle is how I look at it. There's a few other teams I somewhat switch around now and then depending on, this player I know he plays all his GLs, so I can play a slightly different strategy than against somebody who I know is going to be half their GLs, you know, where it gives me a bit more flexibility on offense, because I know, like, if they place half their GLs, pretty much any 3 GLs I keep can kill any other 3 GLs. Just depends on the banners that I want to make. Not any can kill any 3, but roughly you can. There's always like some interesting way you can be creative, and most GLs can kill most other GLs. But I think the offensive gameplay style is great to avoid burnout, spend less time, have more fun attacking and killing stuff, which I personally enjoy. Reduce the RNG. Like, when you're doing these off-tier counters, there's always some element of RNG involved. Not always, but regularly some element of RNG involved. Or your mods have to be just so, or your, the turn order has to be, well, ties into the mod, I guess, just so. And if the opponent places a weird, character that's specifically set up to stop the off-tier counters, probably going to stop you, or at least add some element of RNG in there, or reduce your banners or something like that. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Like, that's awesome. If you have time and you enjoy that, knock yourself out. But I think if you want to keep your playtime to a stable amount, or a stable amount for you, I think offense is an easier way to do it. And it feels more fun to me, for me personally. So, now that I've totally sold the shit out of the offensive playstyle, maybe I've sold it, I don't know, maybe you don't care. Let's go look at some playstyles. There's not a lot to change, honestly, but so as reference, this is what I generally keep in mind: low effort, copycat, high, low effort copycat, and then offense. So, what's going on? What's under development playstyles wise? Well, big surprise. Okay, I'm going to start this guy's video over from the beginning. Oh, you know what? Let's go look at another video of his. Okay, there we go. Playstyles under development. So off-tier counters are still growing like crazy. There's more and more and more, and more counters to counter the counters to stop the other counters, which is fun to watch. But I think this is taking a bit of a break now, obviously, because we have a 3v3 season coming up. That's going to totally change people's focuses. I mean, besides the TW, who knows if that's going to change? I think it will. I think it's inevitable, but I don't know when or what they'll do. So, yeah, there's still emphasis on very technical stuff in the off-tier things. Nothing wrong with that, but you have to be really on top of your game to focus on that. Most important, I think, part to focus on is turn order for mini counters to make sure your turn order is correct. Troopers, bounty hunters, Bad Batch. What are some other popular teams? Ewoks, Geonosians. I mean, all of them have a proper turn order that works against the vast majority of teams. So it's important to have those accurate. Fragility of opponents. This is something I talked about last time. This is even bigger in 3v3. I know this is reviewing the meta right now. We'll talk about this in the future part a little bit, but because we're going into a 3v3 season, it is incredibly important to be agile and to keep track of what's happening and what's going to happen. Because in 3v3s, people are going to be all over the place. No one knows what counters. Well, you do. You have GG. You can go look up counters. Or there's like 1,500 3v3 videos on the Grand Arena Science website too. Not the new ones, obviously, because we haven't seen those yet, but a huge amount of options out there if you want to do research. But a lot of people won't. They don't have time or forget or whatever. But they're going to put some weird teams. So keep track of what these weird teams are and keep them in mind. And you'll get a huge advantage when you're trying to figure out what beats what. Because the most common mistake, even more so in 3v3, is people just take the wrong team. They have a team that could beat some team easily, but they don't check or don't have time or think they remember, and they're wrong. So do your research and you'll save yourself a lot of headache in 3v3. And yeah, in 3v3, one interesting thing too is that a big advantage, talking about guilds and the like copying guild templates or copying TW loadouts and stuff like that. It's great in 5v5, but in 3v3 it doesn't exist. I mean, some guilds do have specific loadouts for 3v3, or different members will share them, share mod setups or stuff between themselves, which is great. But it's not nearly the level that 5v5 is. So there's going to be even more people who are struggling in the 3v3 world. So if you like 3v3, you like GAC, this is a great time for players like us. Here's just what I wrote last episode. If you want to pause and read this, I don't know, you might not, I don't know. Yeah, so move on to fleet. We're still in a fleet meta. There's no doubt about it. More and more players are moving to the expect to clear everything on the ground and let's see if we have a better fleet game. Because oftentimes many players do have a distinct advantage in fleet. For relic levels, it's the most common, obviously, or because their opponent just always fails one particular counter and you can easily see, like in past GAC history, oh, they always use this and they fail, or whatever the case may be. Or they keep something way overpowered and don't try something else and frequently fail. So you can take advantage of the fleet meta quite a bit, and then it's going to be the same in 3v3. But I want to play a little, oh, that's the Wampa topic. Let's play a little game of what's best in fleet. This is something that I play every week almost, every time I set my fleet defense. I usually keep the same one throughout the week. Maybe I'll change one fleet for a certain opponent or something, but to figure out what's best on defense, and I'm looking at this from a points differential. Depending on your roster size, it may just be I need to keep these 3 fleets if I want to beat 3 fleets. That's very possible. But for me personally, I look at this from a point differential, which gives me the highest chance to get the most points, or the lowest chance for my opponents to get the most points. And to do that, I start with my offense, obviously. And I look at my fleets and I see what is very powerful on offense. What by powerful I mean kills a variety of fleets for high banners. So width and height. Width, variety, height, total amount of banners possible. And for me, this is Rebels, Executor, and Empire. Empire is a bit broader. I mean, I think Empire right now is the second best fleet in the game in terms of breadth. I think Rebels is second best in terms of banners and flex. That's close. A couple weeks ago, I said Rebels were second best. But really now with the 7-star TIE Interceptor, I think Empire is second best and Rebels are behind Empire. Although, yeah, there's no question that Empire is better, especially if you consider offense and defense. Empire is far better on defense than Rebels. Far, far better. So I think Empire is the second best fleet behind Executor now. What about Negotiator? You say, well, Negotiator is great, but like it's countered by Rebels. It's countered by Empire. It's countered by First Order. That's a little more sketchy, but it's countered by First Order. And on offense, it can't really beat Empire very well. It can most Rebel fleets it'll beat with no issue. It's great against Malevolence. I'm not including Raddus or Mace. So I really think Rebels are better than Negotiator. Maybe Negotiator is better banners against like Malevolence or Rebels, but nobody plays Rebels on defense, at least at higher ranges. So highly powerful on defense. Let's go down here. Executor and Empire, those are the best defensive fleets right now, no question. High banners on offense, Rebels, Executor, and Negotiator. So Negotiator is good. If your opponent places Rebels, not going to happen, mostly. At lower roster sizes, that may. Negotiator is great, and it's great against Malevolence. A lot of people are placing Malevolence on defense because it's generally a banner-stealing team, except versus Negotiator. So that dynamic is very interesting. I saw a lot of Negotiator Malevolence back and forths because Negotiator on defense sort of calls for Rebels. Like Rebels will destroy Negotiator. So do Empire. So it's almost easier sometimes to keep it for offense. The problem then is what do you put on defense to replace Negotiator? If you have Malevolence and Executor, what else do you put? Do you put Raddus? Well, Rebels beat Raddus even worse than they beat Negotiator. First Order beats Raddus, no problem. If, for instance, you didn't have your Executor on defense or your opponent's First Order team is not good enough to beat your Executor, so it's going to be used against something else. Low banners on defense. Like if you put them on defense, your opponent will get low banners. Empire is fantastic. Executor is usually good, but the problem is, I don't know, low banners. Everything, it's very hard to beat Empire with high banners. Rebels is probably the best option, but you're not guaranteed to beat them. You have a high chance depending on your relic levels, but it's not a guaranteed thing, but I still think it's the best Empire counter, minus Executor. Executor, 50% of the time, Executor will give low banners. The other 50% of the time, it's going to be beat by the Executor for like 74 or 72. And by a First Order fleet, almost all the time for like 66 to 68, which is still sort of lowish banners. The Malevolence, the Finalizer will beat it for high banners. Finalizer, what I'm talking about. The Negotiator will be the Malevolence for high banners, 70 plus. Some Empire fleets, depending a little bit on RNG with assists and stuff, You can usually beat for like 68 to 71 or 72 with Empire fleets. But you could also get unlucky and beat it for 64 or something like that. And Negotiator, if your opponent has Rebels or Empire, your Negotiator is not going to do well. You'll give out 50 or 70 plus points. But if your opponent's Rebels or Empire are engaged elsewhere, or their Rebels suck, possible. I think almost everybody has a good Empire fleet now, but everybody in Kyber won. If your Negotiator, if your opponent's Rebels are crappy, or then you put Raddus, and they're going to use Rebels against Raddus, you give up points on Raddus, then they sort of have to use Empire on your Negotiator, unless you put Empire, and they have to use Empire on Empire, but they would still have Executor somewhere. This is a fascinating puzzle, this sort of set. I still think that one of the best is Executor, Executor on defense, with Negotiator and Malevolence. Like, those three fleets are really good together. On offense, assuming you have all your fleets are close to maxed or something, you have First Order for Executor, but there's some good Executor counter or Executor additions that make First Order difficult, like B-28 or Plo, I've seen once, that's funny. Annoying and funny. Even Scimitar can pose a problem to the First Order counter. So then you have to use First Order against somebody else. First Order is not great against teams except Rebels and Raddus. Like, you can kill Negotiator and Empire. You can also kill Malevolence, but in that order, maybe Empire, Negotiator, Malevolence are the best. Let's just take a look here. So let's do Chimera, Negotiator, and Malevolence. And let's go see what did I say? That wasn't Chimera. Yeah, I'm using First Order against these. Let's go look how First Order does. And I have to scroll down a ways, I imagine. I might even have to switch. Okay, let me get the finalizer. Oh, just capital finalizer. Okay. So that's that. That's that. And we'll use against. And that's the Malevolence counters. Yeah, it's funny. So Empire, Chimera, I'm putting Chimera. I think Executrix is better on offense than Chimera. So there's options here for finalizer, 60%. Does it get higher than 60? Not meaningfully. Let's take this off and see what happens. About 60% win rate against Empire. Now, I'm sure there's things you can do to make that a little bit more palatable, but that's not great. 60% is not great. And probably half of these or more have a Relic 5 or 5-star TIE Echelon. Very hard to see. That's a big problem in the fleet counters on GG, actually. Big problem with the fleet counters, counter data, is that even more, well, hugely more than character counters, the relic level makes such a big difference in what fleets do well against others. And there's no way to tell here, like, you can't tell if the characters are relict or not. I mean, it's unfortunately very inaccurate. Anyway, in general, 60% is a terrible win rate. Against Negotiator, there's some lineups that have a decent win rate. Yeah, here we go. 63. Still, it's not the best for sure. And the popular 2 ETL and 2 starts, 20, 30% win rate. Terrible. Against Malevolence, 20, 30, 40% there. 60% here, but only seen 7 times. Like, how good is that really? So this is really the problem. Is if your opponent has a good first order fleet that they know can counter your Executor, are you going to put your Executor on defense? And if you don't put your Executor on defense, sure, you're taking their first order fleet sort of out of the equation. As long as you don't place first order erratus, you're taking your first order fleet out of the equation. But then they also are not going to probably place Negotiator or Executor, I'm sorry. Because if we're just trying to make first order worthless, you have these three fleets right here: Negotiator, Malevolence, and Chimera. Great fleets. Malevolence, I think, is great on defense, better than offense. Offense is good for wins, but against a good player, they should always beat all your fleets. It's very hard to stop them altogether. But this takes Finalizer out of the running, sort of. And then they're left with your opponent. If they put these three on defense, they'll be left with Finalizer, can't do so much. Radis, can't do great against either of these lineups. I would say actually against Malevolence, they sort of have a chance. Rebels are great. They can kill a number of things. And Executor, of course, can kill anything. So it's a good, I think this may be, in terms of percentages, one of the better lineups. Not great for banners for you. Executor can give you good banners. Rebels, probably good banners. However, it suffers from giving yourself some limited options because you have Radis and Finalizer that you have to take out. Like, a lot depends on what your opponent places. If both you and your opponent plays this, it's going to be a little messy, and it'll come down to whoever practices more. Whereas if you keep Empire for offense and you put Executor instead, an opponent who places this defense will be able to kill your defense, one-shot it, and you will be able to kill their defense because you'll have your first order to use against their Executor, unless they put the three attackers starting with Executor, but then you have your Rebels to take out that, assuming the Rebels are highly relic. So this is, if you're not confused, this is a fascinating fleet meta we have going on right now. A lot depends on your opponent, but mostly it depends on what you're comfortable beating. And a lot of this comes down to what else can First Order do. This picture does not tell a great story, because none of this stuff includes relic levels. And we might be getting a new fleet soon. Rebel or Ravager or something, who knows. But this interaction between First Order and Empire is fascinating. Which one are you choosing to keep on offense, sort of? Obviously, Empire is the better defensive fleet, no question whatsoever. But you sort of have to choose what your Empire fleet does based upon what you're doing in your First Order fleet, I think. Fascinating dynamic. I love this. And we're at 50 minutes. Holy moly. Okay, let's go on. What's changing team-wise? Darth Revan. In fives, he's going down, down, down. Malak counters almost all the setups because of the AIs. Like, you would think you put HK in there. His AoE does a tenacity down, and Wampa is screwed. Well, he doesn't do an AoE. I mean, maybe 5% of the time he will or something like that. But Darth Revan without Malak is Wampa bait. Even with Nest in there, he's Wampa bait. And you put Nest in there to stop troopers, right? Well, yeah, it stops troopers, but you send in Wampa even higher banners. So you keep Darth Malak with the team, and no Nest, and generally troopers are going to eat him up. If you put Darth Malak and Nest in there, just throw in Death Trooper, and troopers can still kill him. So Darth Revan is really on the downhill slide. In 3, he's much different, I think. It'll still be different. Because Darth Malak can be there almost all the time, and that means Wampa is not going to thrive against him. And this is teams and characters, by the way. And once Darth Malgus comes, Darth Revan and Darth Malak are going to be in the Darth Malgus team, I think, for sure. So it's nice to boost them a little bit if they're going to be used in 3s and in Darth Malgus team. That's going to be very interesting. Mace. This is a cool dynamic right here. Most people fuck it up, but it can still be very cool. So Mace is great in a lot of teams. I think on offense in general, he's wonderful. On defense, he's good in the Starkiller teams and in the JMK teams, unless you're trying to mirror the JMK team and you don't know how Mace works. I've seen a few people screw this up. It's ridiculous. So let's talk about what Mace does. He inflicts ability block on his basic. That's the key here. So when Ahsoka is called to assist, you assume you have a whole Galactic Republic team, and Ahsoka is called to assist. Ahsoka will call the weakest other. Whenever JMK is unique, I think whenever ally attacks out of turn, they call the weakest other Galactic Republic ally to assist. Actually, no, the weakest other ally, I don't even think it has to be Galactic Republic, but you need all Galactic Republic for Ahsoka to assist, so it's going to be all Galactic Republic. Anyway, and so you want Mace to be the weakest. Otherwise, you'll have, well, I don't know, it depends on the other characters, but Mace should have the least. Weakest means least health and protection combined. So if Mace is assisting on all the assists, sort of shuts down the C counter, it can F up the bounty hunter counter. Still an RNG-ish, you can still do that. I mean, the counter is being killing Cat and then two-shotting with gas or something. It can also mess up the gas counter. Like if you get Rex during the time the gas is sitting, Mace is called to assist on Rex and ability blocks him. Problem. Problem not because Rex is going to gain turn meter, because you can put tenacity up and stop Maces from ability blocking the other damage skills and assist skills and stuff like that. But in 5v5, so many people place Maces are only a tank. And when you're countering JMK with another JMK, which is super easy to do, like it's almost guaranteed, you target Mace with your JMK's invulnerability move. So Ahsoka assists and removes the 2 stacks of Shatterpoint, or 3 stacks, or whatever, of Shatterpoint from Mace, so that when your Ahsoka takes a turn, assuming Mace is the only tank on the enemy team, your Ahsoka can annihilate the other Ahsoka. It's so easy. You don't even have to go first as Ahsoka. Like, you can still lose your tank, but then you go straight for the enemy Ahsoka, and then the cleanup, like you just hit auto and done. A lot of people mess that up. And especially a lot of people mess it up are playing like guild templates, because this is way different in the guild, in TW I mean, in the guild in TW, where oftentimes Mace has the Omicron, and they play like slow, healthy Ahsokas, so they sort of counter the JMK counter, the JML counter to JMK cat teams. They're trying to stop that, and for that you want a healthy big cat. And then you want Mace to assist and do ability blocks to the other Jedis. That's a whole other thing. But they oftentimes have big fat cats that are slow. So in GAC, if your cat is not even, like cats are like 320 or something, super slow. So if your cat is medium fast, 330, 340, whatever, that's very easy in 5v5 for the JMK cat Mace teams, where Mace is the only tank, to get 65 points. A lot of people is just, they're copying from TW and don't know any better. Interesting stuff. I shouldn't have talked for 5 minutes about that, but it's cool. Wampa. Wampa is killing everything. Let's take that off. This is not GLs. So, Wampa kills some of them on Wampa teams, but when you have Kyle in there, avoid. It's not good. You're going to die. Almost all the item teams, virtually all the GG teams. It's interesting here. You see, not so much with BB-8. Now you think, oh, BB-8's there. He's going to assist it, or he's going to counterattack. No, not really. So there's very little to worry about here. It's different if you have ability block from IG-88 or something like that. This one, sometimes just the damage from neutral take another team, do a mass assist on you, because you have I forget the name of Newt's extortion. You have it active on you, you don't pay extortion, and he'll call a mass assist. And depending on gear relic levels, you might be blown up the second time. But Iden, he kills. Mothma teams, does great. Ewok teams, not all of them, surprisingly. Some of the Chirpa Ewoks teams put out a boatload of damage, and they have their own little TM trains. Do not kill GBA. Now, where is the Darth Revan teams in here? Maybe I think they're on page 3. Night Sisters kills a bunch of Night Sisters actually, but not so many. Tenacity down comes from zombie, and maybe slow zombies or crap zombies you'll beat with Wampa, but not so much. Kills a heck of a lot of Iden teams, huh? Dash teams, he does great at, unless they're Young Han Solo. Like for instance here, if you look at Dash, Young Han Solo, no. Not Young Han Solo, yes. We're here with Kira and Vet, 50-50. Obviously not good against IG-11 because he has tenacity down, AoE. But there's some that he wins 100% of the time. This one with the Vets. And L3 blows it up very easily. Han, new teams most of the time. And this one surprised me actually. I think there's like really weak teams, but Canberra's, his third attack will give tenacity down. But I think it's that oftentimes it doesn't line up very well with the other skills, like blind or something from mission. So it doesn't work quite as well. More Dash teams, 60% against reasonable C teams. Oh, Darth Revan, where are you? Just type his name in manually here if I don't. There he is. 93% against this Darth Revan team. You put Marauder in there, some damage, 73%. But yeah, 73%, 100%. It really is only when you add Malik that you start failing. And anyway, you can look through the other Wampa stats. He kills a bunch of other teams too, just not commonly tried against them in the first place because people don't realize how powerful he is. And then other teams, Empire fleets. Yeah, let's talk about that. What's coming up in the future? I think there's going to be more Tuscans. Because I think there's 3v3 Omicron. I hope it eventually is 5v5 once there's more than 3 Tuscans. But it's interesting, I'd love to see more Tuscans, especially after the latest Book of Boba Fett show. Some cool Tuscan stuff in there. Really enjoyed that. The Inquisitors' uniques and how they change them after the fact. Not that they're so much more better. I am English good. Not that they're so much better, but they're definitely more powerful. I think in 5s rather so than 3s. I don't think they're going to be great in 3s unless somebody tries to like counter them with Jedi or something. I think they're better on offense in 3s when you find Jedi teams, because there will be Jedi teams you're going to have to place, Bastille Elite teams, stuff like that. Or for lower roster levels, JKR teams. There's some of the Inquisitors that will do great even at, gear or 3-star, 4-star, gear 11 will do great against JKR teams, which are pretty common in some lower 3v3 tiers. In the future, I think we know what the next GAC factions are going to be. Sith Empire, we already have Malgus, but I think we're going to get some Old Republic too. We're really short on Omicrons for light side characters. The same guy who loves his Ewoks, the Gerbil is his name, by the way. He did an interesting video on that a couple weeks ago. And we have Inquisitors now with anti-Jedi kits. Where are the Jedi's for them to play against? Are they meaning Inquisitors to be like an entry-level team or something? I don't think so. I certainly don't think so. Maybe, but I think there's going to be Old Republic Jedi coming. Still don't know the kit for the Grand Inquisitor. That's very annoying. Hopefully we'll know it sometime soon-ish. And lastly, 3v3 is here again. Yes, we just have one season, then we'll go back to 5v5, but I imagine it's going to be going back and forth. And that really will impact the 5v5 meta quite a bit. I think the tippity top, let's say the top 50 players, roughly, they're the top 50 5v5 players. I think there's going to be 30 of them, I don't know, 40 of them that'll stay up there and they'll compete in 3v3 also. But at least 10, I think more than that, but at the minimum, 20% of them are not 3v3 players and they'll drop into the top, 100 or top 150 or something. But that's a semi-permanent thing. Like instead of bouncing from place 40 to place 20, they're going to bounce from place 40 to place 120 or place 80, something like that. And so players who are more flexible and more well-rounded and maybe more offense-focused, who knows, might generally tend to place higher because they do well at both 3v3 and 5v5. But that's purely speculation. I have no clue what's going to happen, obviously. And we'll be watching together as things develop. I hope you enjoy your 3v3 season, your planning for 3v3. Quite a few really good 3v3 videos out there from a bunch of different creators. Interesting stuff. As always, check out Grand Arena Science. Like I said, we have like 1,500 3v3 videos there. But of course, they're not any of the new characters that have come out in the last 3-4 months. So that'll have to wait until the 3v3 season actually starts. In the meantime, cheers. Thank you for watching, listening to this hour and longest ever blah, blah, blah about GAC. Hope you enjoyed it. Good luck. Have fun. And cheers.